And we're back with Record Live. It's great to be joined by a very special guest today, David Jones, not the department store, but the man himself. I'm sure you get that a lot, David.
Yeah, I often, especially in shops, when I'm talking to people and they say David Jones and I'm buying something, I say, if I own David Jones, do you really think I'd be doing this by myself?
For those
Best
that
one.
might for
Sorry,
those that
best
might
one.
be watching outside of Australia, David Jones is a large department store here in Australia, so hence the confusion.
I do enjoy going to David Jones on the off occasion and just pulling out my credit card and just paying and just look at the name.
Oh, that's great. Well, we've got you on today, David, because there's a sort of special date coming up this Sabbath, and before we talk about that, we'll welcome Zanita as well. It's great to have you back, Zanita. Sorry about that. It's great to have Zanita and David joining us today. But yeah, this Sabbath is October 22, and that's a significant date in Adventist history, often known as the Great Disappointment. And in 1844, a group of Adventists, people looking forward to the second coming of Jesus, thought and predicted that Jesus would come back on October 22, 1844. And when he didn't, there was a great disappointment. And people started revisiting the scriptures, I guess, and the Adventist denomination was sort of born out of that movement. So this Sabbath, it's 100 and I did the maths before, I've forgotten the number, 178 years. Is that right? Since
That's
1844.
correct. Yep.
We're still here. We're still waiting for Jesus to come back. And I don't know if it's worth celebrating or maybe rebranding. But we're going to talk a little bit today about what we're doing in the South Pacific Division for this Sabbath and for this, I guess, anniversary. And we're going to talk a little bit about Adventist history and why it might be still important today. So, David, tell us a little bit about your role firstly and what you do, and why we're getting you on to talk about Adventist history.
Well, first of all, my role is I'm Heritage Director for the South Pacific Division. I started in January of this year, and my role encompasses a whole range of different things, from managing the archives of the church, from the minutes of meetings, and one of the most amazing books that we've got is a ledger from 1894, which has which we put on gloves and we look at it because it's got amazing names in it. It's so beautifully handwritten, and it's says something like the South Queensland Mission and the South Australian Mission, and it's got some incredibly famous names in there, and it's actually got a list also of Ellen White's donations to the church. So we look after archives, and we also look after minutes of all meetings, ledgers. We look after treasury. We also are custodians of artifacts that are collected right throughout the South Pacific Division, which we look after and we keep in a very special vault that's temperature controlled. So we manage to make sure that none of them perish. And our job is to make sure that we know what we've got, and if the church needs to find some information, we can put our hands on it. I also look after Sunnyside, which is Ellen White's home, and that's a real joy to me because before I became Heritage Director, I was a teacher. And we've instigated a schools program this year where we have schools come in and spend the day at Sunnyside. And we give them a tour of the house. We make no apologies about talking about our church. They make damper, they make butter, they play old time games. I had a fantastic group of local ladies put together a whole lot of costumes. So we've got 60 costumes for kids to change into on the day. And they run around and get pictures taken. And we talk about old and new, and it's all curriculum based. And so that's a really important thing to me, is making our history come alive for our younger people because of my education background.
Awesome. And you are actually streaming from Sunnyside right now, aren't you?
Oh, look, I could not come here. We've actually spent a bit of time just turning Sunnyside back to how it was in the 1890s when Ellen White first came here, and I'd invite everyone to come along and have a look, because it's quite different than it has been, and we're very, very excited about the developments here.
Awesome.
And that room that you're sitting in, David, is that significant in some way? Like, where are you broadcasting from? Tell us.
I'm broadcasting from a room that was set up as it would have been with a writing room, where the secretaries would have worked, and a table, and over to my left, and I wish you could see it, we've got a typewriter, other desks, and we've got a cabinet with all of Mrs. White's writings in it, and we like to bring in the students or even our guests on a Sabbath afternoon. We open between 3 and 5 every Sabbath afternoon, and just like to, we've had people come in here and they say, I just feel like this is a really, really important place in our history. But the other thing we want people to feel is it's a place to celebrate. It really is. And the more we read about Mrs. White, the more we find that that Sunnyside was a hive of activity, and it was a place where it was active. She had 500 fruit trees. She had travellers coming through. It was a safe place, and we just love being here. And I know that some of my workers will come and sit on the balcony with me on a Sabbath afternoon and just take in being at Sunnyside.
Such a special name as well to it. You have an event coming up this weekend, and you've described it as a celebration, and you've also renamed it The Great Appointment, which is ironic given the name The Great Disappointment. And so I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, like, what are we celebrating exactly this weekend, and why have you renamed it?
It was at the start of the year. One of the things that I guess I really wanted to instigate in our church through the South Pacific Division was celebrating our heritage, and the Heritage Week falls on this week, the Heritage Day. And so I was actually giving a tour to a group of theology students with Mark Pierce, who's the E.G. White Research Director. And we're just talking, I'm saying, I want to do something on Sabbath. And we're talking about the great disappointment. And we're saying we want to do something that signifies that this actually, I guess it was a disappointment for those people that were there on that day and the expectation that Jesus was actually going to come. And I can just imagine their feeling at, when the clock struck 12 o'clock and Jesus hadn't come. And Justin Terrerison, who's Ellen White's great grandson, who'll be on part of the program on Sabbath, said it best. He said it was a prophetic time for a start of a movement of a people for the end times, for the times that we are living in now. And it was a great disappointment, but it was also an appointment of our church. And I went through some of the documentations, because William Miller, who brought forward this concept of October 22, he went away and studied more and more and more, and he realized that it was actually a moment that was a really important prophecy, and he had to take it forward from there. And some of the things from their some of the points they got from their study was that Jesus was coming again soon, and is coming again soon. That the seventh day Sabbath, Seventh-day Adventist, that's what came out of that. He talked about that God doesn't torment sinners. This is what they found from their study. That Christ is our advocate in heaven, that he's advocating for us. And obviously then the three angels message of in Revelation. So that came out of it, and that's us. That's what we believe. That's who we are. That's our identity. So
I feel there's mixed feelings about things like this, because some people are like very passionate about our history and our where we've come from. I know things like when I was growing up, Keepers of the Flame and, Pathfinder honors and stuff we were learning about, and I know you've incorporated some of that, and maybe you can tell us a bit about some of the new Pathfinder stuff you're doing later. But others, we got a comment on the promo post for this, and someone was saying we shouldn't give it this importance. We shouldn't, focus on it. They were sort of saying, there's a lot of sort of issues in the church. There's needs that are right in front of us. Why reflect? Why look at our history and take this time? Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Ellen White has a quote, and it says, in reviewing our past, and I've got this prepared earlier, reviewing our past, having travelled over every step of advance to our present standing, I can say, praise God, as I see what the Lord has wrought. I am filled with astonishment and with confidence in Christ as our leader. We have nothing to fear for the future except that we shall forget the way the Lord has led us in the past and his teaching in our history. So it is a time of us looking back at our church. And if I was to bring you to Sunnyside and say, and we have tours here, and I bring the people here and say, Mrs. White moved here in 1895. December 25, she moved in here. She'd been in Australia for 4 years. This was the spot where she decided she wanted to have a place of education, and she wanted to support that education by actually being here. And the missionary school, the Australasian missionary school came here. The sanitarium health food company came from this point. Our health message came from this point. So it is a place to celebrate. But coming back to your question, I think it's really important. There's a lot of sayings such as you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And I liken that to when my children were younger, they'd go, are we there yet, Dad? Are we there yet, Dad? And I'd pull out a map and pass it over the back. This is obviously long before Google Maps. And I'd say, okay, can you see where we're going? Yes. All right. Can you trace where we've been? And that can tell us where we are on the journey. So I think it's important. And I pulled a couple of quotes out earlier today regarding this. And this is a quote that I found. It said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin and culture is like a tree without roots. And George Orwell, who wrote some books, said the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. So history, and God also wants us to remember. I go through the Bible. He stopped creating on the 6th day and he said, rest on the 7th. Then in Exodus, he goes, remember the Sabbath day. And then when he brought the children out of Israel, he instigated the Passover to remember the painting of the blood on the doorsteps. And then at the Last Supper, and there's just 3 examples I'm using, he said, take, eat, remember me, and this will be what will carry you through till I come again. So he's a big fan of history as well, God is.
I was going to say there is an Exodus. If you translate the word remember, I'm pretty sure it's the word remember. It translates to mean look back in order to move forward. And so it's that, again, that importance of like looking back at our history so that we can make better decisions or that we can move on. So I really like that point. But I suppose when we think especially about the Great Disappointment, what, in your opinion, like what things can we get from looking at the past? Like how can that encourage us?
Well, I guess, we can talk about personal anecdotes when we've really prayed hard for something that we thought was going to happen. And that's not necessarily in God's plan. And so we should have some resilience to understanding that. And I often talk about this because I often want things. I want things really badly and I would like things to happen, but God has another plan. God in 1844 wanted to bring more people with him. He wanted to have this movement. He wanted to, we're on the other side of that is that we're on this, we're on the universal stage. And so God wants to show the universe, that he was just and true, but he also wants us to develop resilience. And we can pray hard for something and it doesn't happen. And I was reading today that a lot of people lost their way after the Great Depression. They went off, but others went more into their Bible and studied harder, and they actually found Christ as a really more meaningful relationship. I mean, even the fact that we weren't tormented forever like some of the other churches were preaching at the time. So that's exciting, for us to do this. I hope that's answering your question. I'm fairly passionate about our history.
That's great. Speaking of our history, we had a comment here from Peter, and he's made a few comments, but we'll start at the top. Sorry, that cuts you off a little bit. We'll get through it quickly. Speaking of valuing our history and cultural resources, do you know when the archives will be digitized so they are not lost and can be accessed by us? They are important records and a part of our heritage and should easily be accessible to all. Is that something in the plan of the Heritage Centre and Adventist Archives that you're working with?
We are working towards more digitalisation. There is some, I guess, discussion around privacy. There is discussions about the ability of people just to call on any information because they want it. And so we have a policy that we work from that's from the GC that states clearly the use of archives. We're happy to work with people if they can make an application to research. We go through a process that makes sure that is complete and that the research is of value and within policy that's from the GC. So we work within the GC policy. But we've actually just ordered a couple of new computers to enhance our digitalisation capabilities, and we're just waiting on them now.
Exciting. You mentioned the importance about heritage, and I guess the thing with history is that a lot of people find it not very interesting or boring, or they're like, let's just move on. What I guess do you do to bring heritage or history alive? Why is it that you are so passionate about it?
Oh, well, being a teacher and watching the cultural change over a period of time has really, and I taught in Adventist schools, so I've got a history of teaching in Adventist schools, and I've seen our identity, I guess, slip, and bringing it alive is a significant point, because history isn't boring. History isn't boring. We learn, and by recounting and bringing it into the modern world, it actually makes it exciting for our kids to engage in. So it's got to be engaging. Telling the same old story. We've got methods these ways to tell a story that the kids use, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, or anything like that. If we can actually make it exciting and interesting, because there's great stories that we should be telling.
I've really enjoyed connecting with Adventist history through the Adventist History podcast. I don't know if you've heard of that. I saw Matthew Lucio is our friend, and he's the host of that podcast. He commented on this, the promo of this post. He said he'll have to watch it on replay because it's a bad time zone in America where he's at the moment. But on a recent podcast they were talking with some folks, and they were asking the question, what is the most interesting or unusual or exciting thing that you found in the archives there that sort of surprised you, or something that was interesting? And I'm stealing that question. Hopefully Matthew will forgive me, but I'm stealing that question from what they've done. But I'm very keen to know what's something that's either shocked you or interested you that you'd like to share with us.
Oh, look, the time that I found the booklet of ledgers was amazing. We found some charts, old charts set up. We've actually got even the Beasts of Revelation, all that have been made life size, and that's sort of, we've still got those. That's interesting. But I guess the thing that's really sort of I found really interesting is the way that we used to present our mission, whether it be backdrops that we have or old slide projectors. Remember the slide projectors on the big stack that they used to just run it across? These days we just plug it into a computer. Look, we've found some artifacts from the islands, which have got some incredible history, some beautiful models of boats that have been of our mission boats that we've found. Look, it's just the most amazing place to walk through, and you just want to just let everyone see what we've got, because we've got a whole big shed full of wonderful artifacts.
Maybe one day you can take us on a virtual tour.
Well, I would love to do that. That would be amazing, and show you some really, some stuff from tribes in the Solomons and things like that, which are really exciting. And we found a letter the other day that was posted to one of our missionaries from the Queen. He sent her some information, and he thanked her. So we found this letter, and it was just, wow, we've got this as well.
Yeah, it's timely right now with the Queen just passed.
That's what I thought.
The Great Disappointment, every time I've been thinking about this day, I keep accidentally calling it the Great Depression, which is funny because I'm sure it actually did send a lot of people into depression afterwards. But it can kind of be seen as like an embarrassing part of the Adventist history, just because of all the, I guess, things that were assumed that never happened. How do you view it in terms of like how we can look at it in a brighter way, or in terms of how we can use it to, I guess, look at our history in a way that we can move forwards?
Well, I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that it was really, it was a point of prophecy that was coming true, which was a raising of a people, and we're that people. I guess it would have been embarrassing. I mean, you think you sold up your farm, you waited, and you probably had, I can almost imagine as a kid, I had these pictures of Noah waiting for the flood, and all the people, say, where's the rain? Where's the rain? Where's the rain? And all of a sudden it rained. And I still have this picture in my head of the people knocking on the ark. Let me in, let me in, let me in. God's given us a fairly big time between the rain and let me in, for us to do the work, to allow people to come, for us to spread his word and save as many people as we can, and have as many people on this journey with us. So embarrassing at the time, yes. Looking at what it's built and how we built a church, and I guess what we seem to forget too is our impact on the community this church has had since that time, with our schools, our health message, ADRA, etc., etc. We've actually a great contribution to society.
We just had a comment here reflecting on some of our conversation. Looking at and reflecting on our history doesn't mean we can't also look at the present and the future. The kind of rhetoric that casts it as one or the other only drives anger whenever anyone speaks of our history. And I think there's some truth to that. We should be able to look back and reflect and learn, while still looking at how we can be active and dynamic in the modern world and into the future. How with the future being pretty much upon us in many ways, how can people who perhaps can't come to Cooranbong on a Sabbath afternoon and walk through Sunnyside, like maybe they're interstate, maybe they're overseas somewhere else in the South Pacific, are there ways? I mean, we laughed about having maybe a virtual tour at some point, but are there plans in place to make this sort of history more accessible, or is it something you really have to do in the flesh? Like, how are we sharing this with churches in Adelaide or in Perth or Darwin or, some of these sort of places?
How long's a piece of string, Jared? I've been doing this job for 10 months, and in that time we've built a schools program. We've got a website that Adventist heritage.adventistchurch.com. We've got Instagram and Facebook. We're trying to do, one of the next things we want to do is create a virtual tour of Sunnyside. That's correct. We do want to do QR codes for when people come, so it's self-touring and someone can come through and read about the room or listen to a podcast about Sunnyside. We've approached, we're on We Are the Church earlier in the year and gave people the opportunity to see Sunnyside, which they haven't seen before. Technology is a wonderful thing. Sometimes we're a slave to it because we expect all these things, but we are working to make Adventist history come alive, and it's using technology to do it, bring Sunnyside. We have, whilst we have the great appointment coming this Sabbath, and we have and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that soon, we just have been working on a 4-part film series of Ellen White's life in Australia, just her life in Australia, how she came to Australia, her impact in the local community, the life at Sunnyside, what it was like. So you'll see a lot of footage of inside of Sunnyside, and also the legacy that she left. So there is going to be media coming out so that people can see this. That's
exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about this event that's happening?
Oh, yes. That's probably why we came on here to talk today.
We'd love to hear it.
So it's actually I'm excited about it because it's been driven by a lot of young people. And for the historian, they will know that most of our pioneers were under 25 at the Great Disappointment. So at the Great Appointment, there's a drama that's being produced by university students at Avondale University Church, completely driven by them, written by them. We've worked through the script. It's accurate. It's exciting. It's engaging, and we've done some footage of that, and we've showed you on our webpage, and I think Adventist Media has got on their webpage as well. We're going to have some special guests, Justin, great-great-great-grandson. We're going to have some special music. We're going to interview we're going to interview a few theologians, youth leaders, youth. We're going to have, I think I said music. We're going to have a Kahoot. Now, if you're talking about technology in the world today, a Kahoot as a South Pacific Division-wide Kahoot, and you can join the team Bates, you can join the team Miller, or you can join the team White. And so there's three Kahoots that are going to be running through the day. So we encourage you all to be part of that. Like was mentioned, we've got a Pathfinder on us. So we built this program so that they can get their Adventist history Pathfinder on us. So Pathfinders can get that. We address a lot of the requirements. So there's quite a lot of thought that's gone into this, a lot of preparation, a script written, produced, filmed. We have Sandra Etterman. She does the Friday night sing-along. She'll be actually leading a sing-along from Sunnyside on Friday night.
Nice.
And then she's going to do some special music on Sabbath here as well. So it's never been done before. We're starting at point zero, as everyone keeps on pointing out. But we want it to become a highlight of the Adventist year, that we focus on our heritage for one Sabbath a year and make it a real special event. I do know that Forest Beach Church last Sabbath had a Heritage Day, and they all dressed up and they wore their gear from the 1900s, and it looked fantastic. So they're engaged. It was great.
That's very cool. So I guess that was going to be my follow-up question. This is hoped to be an ongoing event in some ways, or at least an emphasis to continue. I mean, it already has happened somewhat at churches. It's been on the calendar, Adventist Heritage Week, but I guess this is making it more significant and providing some activities and some programs for people to engage with, whereas maybe there weren't in the past some of those things.
So we're working with some youth leaders to write a new Pathfinder Honour as well that we'll base our program around. So it'll be a whole new honour on probably Australian Adventist history, which would be an exciting one to do.
Yep.
But the thing that, like I said, the thing that I'd love to do is continually involving our young people and making our young people engaged in our history.
Why is it that you're so passionate about that? You spoke about that to me a little bit before we started the broadcast, but would you like to share that a bit more?
Look, having been a teacher for many years, like I've said this, I think already, that I just feel that our kids just need to just understand the privilege, the opportunity, the excitement of being part of a church that's significant in God's plan for this world. And I just want the kids from every level, from our younger children through to our college kids. I just don't want any of them to miss out on meeting Jesus on that day.
So speaking of Ellen White, and we've got this Adventist History Heritage Week and this weekend, you're also a little bit involved, as am I, in another upcoming event. Do you want to briefly speak about that? So October 22nd is this Great Appointment event, but on November 6th, there's also a special Ellen White symposium. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that's happening and what the purpose of that event is?
Well, we better, otherwise Darius won't be real happy with us. So. Yes, we've got a whole day of amazing speakers from all over the world coming in, and we're talking about Ellen White in contemporary society. Because, look, I have a couple of colleagues or those that work in the Heritage Department that were born and bred Adventists, that went to Adventist schools, that went to Adventist church, and they said, you know what, Mrs. White, we always thought it was don't do this, don't do that, don't do anything else. And they've come to work for the Heritage Centre. We've run school programs, we've run tours, we've researched Ellen White and everyone else. Let's just say that everyone else that we've researched, and we found out that she was very much well ahead of her time. She was a woman in a man's world. She believed she was progressive in her thinking in so many ways, and we often just pull out the bits that we want to justify our points of view without actually looking at the full story. One of the great stories in that was that there was a family that was short of food, and Ellen White gave them one of her chickens. And of course, the question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Think about that. So there's lots of stories like that. And what we're trying to do with the symposium is we're bringing Ellen White into contemporary society and what that actually means for us today. Don't look at her back in when she was writing, but look, how does that apply to us today? What are the lessons? Not necessarily what are the situations, but what lessons did we learn, and can we learn from that? And I guess that's part of the 4-part film that's going to show in between the speakers during the day.
Is this sounds like quite a grand event. Is this an event that is going to be run every year, and how can people kind of access this?
For the access to I just saw Jared put up the Ellen White Symposium information before. It is going to be an ongoing event for a few years. We'd like to see it ongoing all the time. It's funny how it marries in very much with our Heritage Day around the same time. So people are going to get a fairly big taste of heritage and spirit of prophecy close together. So it is going to be, well, 2 grand events really, open to the people of the SPD.
Awesome.
What you mentioned, and I heard some of your colleagues take a worship, some of the younger ladies that you work with, about what they'd learned about Ellen White. I'm interested, now that we've got you on the show today, what have you learnt about Ellen White that perhaps you didn't know before coming to work there? Or how have you changed in this role? What has it done for you to engage more closely with our history and to look at some of this stuff and to plan some of these events? I imagine there would be some impact on yourself thinking about some of this and working through it all.
Oh, Jared, this is such a magnificent question. I learnt that she was a practical Christian. She made a massive impact in this community. This community was in the Depression period of time, and Sunnyside was a safe place where travellers would come through, and she'd fill their bag with fruit and goodies to keep on going. That her house never had less than 10 people at the table, and that children would run and play and have wonderful times. And people, the thing that I think I've learned about Ellen White is she was alive. I've seen some of the pictures of her with that sort of stoic look that we all view. And I just think that this place would have been just a hive of activity. It would have been a most magnificent place to be, because you knew that this lady was such a God-fearing, practical Christian. And, there was a gentleman that lost his wife, and she would take food to him. She would pass on food to people in the community. She never took on much herself. She used to cut the back out of her dress so that she could, instead of buying a whole new dress, she'd cut the back out of her dress and resew it so that she had more money to share. Mm-hmm. And she was a woman of incredible vision. And I understand, and I see some of the, I guess a little bit of negativity about her. But when you get to see her and realize that this place is a place of celebration, and when we have a tour here, one of the first things I say to people is this is a place to celebrate. This was alive. It was the sunny side. It was a beacon for our community, and her impact is still here today. And look, I'm an Adventist, 4th, 5th, 6th generation. I think I'm an Adventist. And I guess I've never engaged with God and with his prophets and his pioneers that led the way for our church as I have in this role. And it's been amazing.
I love what you're saying, and I hear your point in terms of like there's people throughout history that we can like look up to and we can learn from. And you sort of mentioned this, like some people don't have such a great view on Ellen G. White, or they think that she's regarded too highly and that we should be looking at Jesus more, which is true. But I guess like what would you say to those people who are kind of trying to
do that? I think put her writings in perspective. Mm-hmm. Apply the principles. Understand that that her actual life that she lived was such that she lived God. So her writing was a reflection of her living God. As in, I don't mean her as a living God, I mean her as in living Jesus and God to the community. She lived what she said. You know, what would Jesus do? She would have had one of those bands. I'm absolutely convinced of it. Absolutely convinced of it. And I could just imagine, I mean, she used to love cream and have a little bit of cream and swieback. So she, you know, she was human. She was human. Someone described me the other day, she had a really great sense of humor as well, and she would laugh and enjoy. And I was talking to Justin. I'm probably going to steal his thunder a little bit from Sabbath, but one of the stories he told that he got passed down through his family was that this is what, when she wrote, there was a rule with all the children and lots of children, and Justin, being the great son of Ellen White, didn't really think of Ellen White anything more than just who he was, and lived around Elmshaven and all that. And he said one of the stories I had was that when her pen was moving, the kids weren't to come to just to leave her while her pen was moving. But once that pen hit the ground, they would run in and they would cuddle her, and she would give them some lollies. And she was a grandma, you know, she was a grandma like any grandma would be. And I guess that's what I just feel that we need to celebrate this lady, her impact on the South Pacific Division, on our church. She was progressive, but not in a reverence way, as in she you know, she wasn't God, or she wasn't equal or anything like that. She was just God's messenger. And what do they say? Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah, true. Still human.
Yeah. So I hope that.
Yeah, I guess that's an important perspective, I guess, because some people might be concerned that this might be blown out of proportion, or that some people might take things too far in honouring the past and honouring the pioneers, and perhaps where that's some of that controversy or some of that pushback comes from, is that people have had enough of people revering Ellen White or putting her up on a pedestal. But you're saying keep things in perspective, keep the context of her and who she was and what she's contributed to the church in this part of the world and in the whole world, and even beyond the church. I guess she's one of the most translated, most printed female authors in history. So that's quite an achievement.
She's one of the I think it's 50 most influential women in American history. And I read an article the other day that said that she was the one that never had a scandal.
There you go. Except for eating cream, that's a bit scandalous.
Oh, yeah. She loved her cream, and she loved swieback. You know, the cooked bread the second time, she would eat that. She used to love it. And yeah, look, again, like I said, don't hold her in reverence. Hold her in being proud of the achievement that she made, and being a real Christian lady.
You've mentioned Ellen G. White as one of those people. Are there any other people in Adventist history that you are really quite fond of or really admire in that regard?
William Miller.
Yeah.
Great guy. You know, could I say my grandfather? You know, he was a division evangelist that travelled around, and you know, it actually, being in this role has really just hit home a whole range of things, because my dad passed away many years ago, and we used to go on caravan trips, and we'd go to Warrnambool, and he'd go duck up this road, and he'd go, I lived up here, and we'd go to Sydney, and we'd go to a place, Toowoomba, Bathurst, Orange, and all these places, and would always go looking for these houses that he lived in. And he used to tell stories how he used to travel around in a 1934 Buick, but their whole family used to pack up and go in the car. They didn't have you know, big moving trucks. They would move in their car. That was all they had. That was all they had. And these people travelled around. These evangelists, I'm using my grandfather as an example, they would travel around all over spreading the news. They would set up tents. My grandmother used to play the organ for my grandfather holding the babies. She used to make curtains. My dad used to love condensed milk because that was such a special thing. And when he did pass away, we went to his drawer, and he had lollies in his drawer because it was such a rarity growing up for what we take as so much for granted these days, as they traveled around and they gave their so much for the church, that he would savor anything like that. So that to me is just an example, and there's probably countless numbers of same people from the missionaries in the islands where we're looking at, the aeroplanes that used to land on these landing strips that were just what? And they did it and they survived. And there's so many stories from people that we meet of how God has led and continued to be with them the whole time.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think history really comes alive when we connect ourselves and our own story into that story. And I appreciate you sharing your family's story and their part of the Advent movement. As we finish up, David, I'm just curious, we often like to end on a practical note at Record Live. And I'm just, we hope that obviously people will watch the event on the weekend. We also hope that they'll tune into the Ellen White Symposium if that's of interest to them. It's going to be a really important event. But what can we take from this conversation practically for our own faith and our own journey, our own life going ahead into this week? Like what's something that you would like to leave with us, to share with us? What can we do to be, as you've described Ellen White, like Jesus to our communities? What can we do to be that light and to share the hope that we have with people around us?
I think the most important thing, and this actually came from my teaching years. Nobody wants to know how much you know nobody cares how much you know unless they know how much you care. Yeah. And Mrs. White, particularly in the Currumbong area, was a lady that cared. And she drew people to her. Jesus was the same. He drew people. You look at the people that Jesus hung out with, he cared for them and they came to him. And even if you go through all of our missionaries, you go through our evangelists, they cared. They cared. And they showed Jesus through their caring. And if I was to, and I think of this every morning when I get out of bed, whether it be work colleagues, whether it be talking to anyone, is I've got to care. I've got to care. Take the time to listen. Take the time to just be there for someone, because that may be the only way they see Jesus today, maybe only contact they have.
Great ending line. Is this right? Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's exactly right.
I think that's a good note to end on. So thank you again, David Jones, for coming. We will put the link up for the event coming this weekend. Someone just asked, will the material be available just on the day, or they'll be able to watch it another day?
It's going to be put to YouTube channel, Adventist Media. We'll spread out some more information regarding that. Little bit of an interest because of our time zones throughout the South Pacific and even in Australia with our various time zones. So there will be the opportunity. However, you won't be able to play the Kahoot because that's live.
Damn. True.
So look, yeah. But you can probably play along at home with your family if you're doing that and guess the questions.
Well, we'll encourage them to come on the day so they can join the Kahoot game. Awesome. Well, thank you again, David, for joining us today. And we hope that the event goes well, and we're looking forward to being there live stream.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys.